All right, Ryan, welcome to the Big Ideas in App Architecture podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for taking the time to come on.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for having me. So, Ryan Berry, as mentioned, I'm by title, I'm the Senior Vice President of Cloud Architecture, which certainly sounds like a mouthful, but at the end of the day, I have a couple of teams that are actively working to build software that runs our SaaS platform, kind of to net it out. When you think about things like the automations, provisioning engines, the customer control plane, and the corresponding APIs that can facilitate those sorts of activities. They all fall into my wheelhouse. And additionally, we have our product is financially focused to be able to help our customers reconcile their financials, report their earnings to Wall Street or regulatory bodies that they might engage with. Why that's relevant as part of the cloud architecture component is that we have lots of financial experts that are building our software and does a lot of very advanced and complicated things. And my team is engaged with them to be able to make effective use of cloud capabilities natively to be able to solve problems, whether it be storing data, interfacing with customer data, scaling services to be able to accommodate the necessary horsepower to be able to accommodate whatever the customer might be doing.
I was really fascinated by was that you've got a strong experience as a software architect, cloud architect, been in the space for a while. You worked at Microsoft for 14 years, and then now you're leading the cloud architecture team as VP, right? For anybody who's new, we know Microsoft and we know a billion things that Microsoft does. But for people who have not been familiar with OneStream, can you simplify and tell us, what is it that OneStream does for people, apart from like knowing that they have a SaaS product, for what domain, what kind of customer do they serve?
Yeah, so one way to consider our platform, like we're aspiring to be, the operating system for finance, and that includes a lot of different things. Our core competency and kind of how we started was kind of it was in the corporate performance management space. So what that means, think about complex, multinational customers of ours, or that exist in the industry, various different industries, not particularly focused in a particular sector, and that you might have different currencies to contend with, and wholly owned subsidiaries, partially owned subsidiaries, and all of the nuances that kind of come into play with generating your financial statements that you disclose to Wall Street becomes a very complex endeavor. And then not only do you have to, our customers have to, have these regulatory needs to be able to report these earnings or in revenue details, but they also need to be able to have, traceability. So when auditors come in and review the disclosures, the financial disclosures our customers have made, they need to be able to have a way to trace, from a financial statement that's disclosed publicly all the way down to where did that number come from, and our platform facilitates that. But then when I say financial or operating system for finance, you think about all of the other tentacles that emerge from that. So if we help our customers report their earnings, it's just kind of the next thing that you can think about is like planning and forecasting. You want to build a new plant in another country, for some new widget that you want to embark upon or start manufacturing. Do you have the capital wherewithal to be able to support that, and hiring people? So we have tentacles that kind of emerge from that core competency and all these other areas of finance to be able to help our customers succeed.
Right. And that was one of the fun things for me during the research. Like, it's like CPM, right? Like corporate performance management is what you do. And these are like associated with like methodologies that you have to kind of tell how much revenue you've made to like is it to the brokers really that you do, like to NASDAQ and NYSE?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think about all the regulatory filings if you're publicly traded here in the U.S. that you have to abide by with the Securities Exchange Commission, in the quarterly earnings and so forth. Our software helps facilitate that. Um, and so that it becomes of critical importance. When you make those sorts of disclosures, you have to be able to back that up, with the auditability and traceability, and that becomes paramount.
Right. And so is this SaaS product something like an end user uses, or it's more for the enterprises? Like one is the reporting part. Like I'm just curious, like can I look at this data to make decisions around what trades I need to make and things like
Yeah,
that?
that's an excellent question. It's definitely it's a we're an enterprise software platform, so we would be used by the companies making those sorts of reportings. So it's they're of varying sizes and nature and scope. We have very massive companies who have actually opted to do some interesting things where they make our financial data, or the data that's in our product that reconciled by a product, available to their entire enterprise, or there might be a core set of people in finance that use our platform. So it's all over the board, and kind of the quantity of users that are actually interacting with our platform.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. For a second, I thought, this is a great hack for me. I can just use that.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. Thank you for describing the solution, obviously. But let's take a swing at understanding this platform that you've built. It's obviously the SaaS product, and it's cloud native, from what I understand. So, explain to us what that cloud native solution kind of means, and why is it important for your enterprises that you serve for it to be like a cloud native SaaS product. And I'm expecting this to be multi-tenant as well, because
Yeah, actually, because of the nature, the type, and sensitivities of the data that we store, we pride ourselves in being not multi-tenant, because
Oh,
when
very
you
cool.
think about doing financial calculations or just the storage of that sort of data, we have very strict isolation and protection around our customers' data. So that's which certainly when it comes to running and operating at scale, we need to make sure that we have a platform that can accommodate that, and we spend a lot of time on the engineering front being able to do that.
Right. So is the entire infrastructure right now on the cloud, or do you do anything on-prem as well?
So that's a good question. So our platform started as an on-premises product, and we have a number of customers that still are running it in on-premises or self-hosted. I guess maybe would be another way to say it, because some of those customers are actually running it themselves in different cloud providers. But our what we're taking more and more advantage of a lot of the innovations that the cloud brings to the table. Even the hot new trends like generative AI and machine learning capabilities. Those sorts of features of our product can only exist in the cloud, just because of
Nature of it is,
scale,
yeah.
the scale compute capacity that exists.
Right. That's really cool. So, if you can like help us understand, uh, like if you can choose to go wherever you want to, either talk about the software or the product architecture. When you worked at like Microsoft for 14 years and coming in, obviously you have a very cloud. If you have a cloud affinity to like, hey, let's move stuff to the cloud. It's just easy. What? So, are you like multi-cloud right now, or are you like? I know you're a big Azure person, so it's a leading question. But so, tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a very close relationship and partnership with Microsoft today. So that's we're available and on the Azure Marketplace. We have a very tight knit relationship with them and making use of their core capabilities. Which boded well for some of the expertise that I could bring to the table to be able to help. Um, take advantage of some of those emerging capabilities to be able to allow us to build new features and functions to delight our customers.
Got it. Yeah. So, in your experience, and this is again an opinion, you know, cloud. If obviously you've partnered with Azure, GCP is there, and there's obviously AWS. Like in the last 10, 15 years, how do you feel like where's the benefit of the cloud? Obviously, starting up and moving apps quickly, or modernizing is something, but where have you really found the biggest like success, or I would say the benefit of the cloud to your stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, one way I'd like to answer that is, I was involved in the very early days of Azure at Microsoft, and I remember distinctly going to the Professional Developers Conference. I think it was like 2008, 2009 timeframe when that was unveiled, and I remember sitting there, even as an employee at Microsoft, thinking, man, nobody's going to buy this thing. Like, I mean, it was very very early days of Azure, and interestingly, Microsoft took a very different and distinct approach at that time than AWS, who was ahead on in the infrastructure service space. Microsoft took more of a platform as a service approach to surfacing, bringing the cloud, to market initially. And why that's interesting, I think you look at their historical focus on being able to really cater to the enterprise developer, and through all the tools they had, and the investments in .NET, and continued investment in Visual Studio and so forth. They wanted to make that pathway to the cloud with less friction. And I do think, looking back, they were just maybe slightly ahead of the curve in that thinking. But the reality was, in that time frame, a lot of customers or a lot of companies were more understanding of running servers and seeing blinky lights, and they wanted to be able to say, I want to take my thing to running on blinking lights that I can watch today and move it into some other building, and I don't really want all the complexities and nuances with all these other tentacles that you're telling me to use to be able to really modernize my application. So kind of the lift and shift approach. So it's interesting to me to kind of see how things have evolved from that time frame, to now. And now I don't even know how many products that like Microsoft and AWS and GCP profess to have in their cloud portfolio, but there's yeah, it's in I'm sure thousands, and when you look at the individual SKUs and variations and so forth. So and it's to really have you really take advantage of that effectively. You have to kind of synthesize solutions using all of those capabilities together to really have a cost-effective and scalable environment that you can actually use. Whether it's an enterprise application or a SaaS product. So it's things have really evolved across all of the cloud providers, and I just think it was interesting. I distinctly remember though thinking like, I thought, the billing model is complicated. Like, if I have a server today runs a whole bunch of web servers, why on earth would I move it to? And the times have definitely changed.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good perspective that you bring in. Like, each cloud provider, the beginnings are so different, and the way they kind of adopted to trends was also interesting. Like, if you see AWS, it was very much like, okay, we have all of this infrastructure, why don't we start renting this out, and started heavy on infrastructure. But then they started adopting open source technology and very Linux heavy. GCP, on the other hand, well, we're going to have an open internet network. That means network is going to be our biggest strong suit. So they had like a great network, and then they leaned on their strength, which is data and AI, and that's what they kind of do. And Microsoft, yeah, I love your perspective that it was a platform first service. But then, I mean, I think Satya has kind of transformed the company. Now they've adopted Linux, which we thought was ever going to happen to. Now they're leading with AI features as well. So it's been a great evolution for me personally to like see all of these, and I get to work with all three cloud partners at the same time. So I get to talk to each one of them individually, and each of them has their strengths. But we are more like whatever the customer wants and picks is where we want to serve them. So our product CockroachDB is a multi-cloud solution that runs everywhere. But it's very interesting to get to know how you think about it from your perspective when you start architecting the solution. Especially since you came on, what were some of the challenges that OneStream was facing, and what were like the first three things you said, oh, we need to do this?
Yeah, so some of the immediate challenges that running, because we had roots in the infrastructure or the on-premises space, that we had a lot of infrastructure that was we had a very infrastructure heavy approach to running our solutions. So we look to optimize that for for ourselves and as well as our customer experiences. And like an example of an innovation that my team kind of brought to bear right out of the gate was the connective tissue that we provide to be able to allow customers to get data from their enterprise. And that's like a really simple example that you think about deploying VPN tunnels as an example. That becomes a challenge at scale. And if a customer changes their network environment, that requires the SaaS provider, also make adjustments on our side. So that's an example of something that we explored to try to simplify. And we made use of some capabilities that were specific in the Azure world called Azure Relay. That actually allows us to have a service that a customer can run, and it provides a facility that we can actually dispatch messages over in this kind of self-hosted API gateway that's in the customer's environment, and we can actually query data sources that are native in their environment and protected in their environment in a secure and safe manner, and still provide the pathway we need from the cloud environment to be able to get that information. So that's an example of something we set out to sell for and optimize out of the gate.
Yeah, and it's critical for your business, especially with like the data that you are kind of managing is also supposed to be secure. Like you can't, it's private to the companies. You have to secure them. So it's essential for you to make sure the network itself is secure and is easy for you to be able to scale and kind of manage, right? So that completely makes sense. So in that world of trying to make these changes, moving to the cloud, what kind of architectural patterns have you guys implemented over the last like few years that somebody can learn from?
Yeah, so some of the things that we've done to be able to help really with simple things like patching and the operational aspects of managing an ecosystem at scale. And all the cloud providers have capabilities in this capacity, and in the Azure world, they have VM scale sets is a common practice. It's a way to be able to have groupings of infrastructure that are like-minded, that all have the same, operating system images on them. So when it comes to, doing, patching, operating system level patching, so it's much easier to do that as kind of a herd mentality as opposed to a pet mentality. So, so definitely, making use of like those types of patterns that are available in the cloud. And then, it goes without saying, there's a lot of cloud native capabilities that, all of the cloud providers have, in the Azure world, AKS, using Kubernetes. And what that affords you the ability to do is instead of having potentially unused capacity, and you think about it, in the cloud, you're paying for that compute resource, whether it's 0% or 100%. Let's get it closer to that 100% range, at a steady state. And that's what, where technologies like, the cloud native capabilities of Kubernetes really come to shine, to be able to help increase that compute density. So that's another, area that, it's, worth pursuing and kind of considering.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, because I mean, Kubernetes obviously has kind of had a moment in the last like 6, 7 years where everybody's like, we want everything to be elastic. One interesting trend I've seen is, Kubernetes for data, right? And that's like, a love and hate relationship because you have to also manage data, network, all those things also.
I was gonna say that, that's interesting because there's a lot of some SaaS providers that I know have done that very thing for whether it be observability data or or just no SQL storage to be able to have query processing compute that can actually scale in React to requests, in storing and persisting data in some sort of cloud native receptacle. And that's interesting to me because when you think about it, there's it's imperative that you have a stateless design in place, because if you have resources that are being spun up on demand. You never want, me to be able to get access to a resource that you just accessed, and, something to be cached or resident. Yes. So there's a lot of nuances to that, but as long as your application design was built in a manner to be able to support that, I think that's a fantastic use
Yeah.
of elastic
There's a
compute.
great advantage to that particular design pattern, 100%. The way I see this, and Ryan, I mean, feel free to share your thoughts on it. The cloud, in my opinion, was like an abstraction over the actual infrastructure. And then and we used to have VMs, which we were very familiar with, but it's what the cloud kind of brought. And then an abstraction on top of that is the ability to scale that with like containers and orchestration that Kubernetes kind of provided, which has been amazing. And the advantage of that is really comes down to the scale that enterprises are trying to hit, right? So I'm just curious, do you have events where you suddenly have to like scale your system? Like I do not know, because if you have like a Super Bowl event, I do not know how that affects OneStream. But I'm talking about like this hockey curve. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You think about like the just the financial reporting in general. You've got, end of month, end of quarter, end of year. Certainly those are very significant events in the financial world when it comes to, what some of our customers are doing. So, and because one of the ways I like to describe our platform, I have a lot of background in like the computational fluid dynamics and like high performance compute space, and there's corollaries to that in the financial modeling that our platform supports. And I think as you never think that something that could be represented perhaps in a very large Excel spreadsheet would be that compute intensive, but if you think about it, like just picture in your head, big three-dimensional matrix of numbers like a, Excel cells, and each one of those cells has some sort of rule behind it, whether it be, conversion to a particular currency, or, relationship to, some downstream level of accounts that you're actually, need to roll up to be able to get to, some product that you're actually reporting to Wall Street on. So there's all these dependencies in how you actually calculate and compute and roll up those values, and it could vary wildly from customer to customer. So what that, and the reason why I'm mentioning that is that when it comes to these events, these end of month, end of quarter, we need to rehydrate massive amounts of data in memory and manipulate it, with the rules that the customer has defined, and to be able to arrive at numbers that we're reporting. So we need, a lot of RAM and a lot of CPU capacity to be able to do
Yeah.
that. So
That's crazy. So do you like currently, do you like have all of that automated, where it automatically goes up and then
yeah,
goes down?
yeah. So that is definitely, some some of the secret sauce that we assembled to be able to help make our customers' experiences positive, and then, but if you extend that into, like the Kubernetes, like the cloud native world as an example, like that, it becomes an even easier construct to be able to have. We got horizontal, pod scalars that can actually, materialize, instances of your application, and then, the Kubernetes scalars to be like in the Azure world, that actually makes use of those VM scale sets I mentioned earlier to be able to, expand the number of VM compute nodes. So we just need, much larger instances to be able to kind of facilitate what our customers' needs are than say like a pizza ordering application at Super Bowl as an example, where it not to throw shade at that type of workload, but the advantage that type of workload has is that, the web facade might not need, a whole lot of RAM and CPU compute, but so you can actually, horizontally scale much easier than you can with the workload that you need, 64 gigs of RAM and 8 CPU. So
Completely makes sense. I mean, and what's interesting is that not just that nowadays, like it's scaling is not just table stake, especially for somebody like you who has to help manage this infrastructure. You also have to consider high availability and resilience along with that, because while you have a very major report, I'm assuming, and stuff has to be done, you can't expect the system to be down, especially during those events. So how do you design for high availability and resilience in your infrastructure?
yeah. So as a SaaS provider, we have SLAs that we have to abide by with our customers, and What's interesting, why I mentioned that is that, or the interesting part of it is that I think a lot of, just kind of coming from my experiences at Microsoft, where a lot of customers I worked with there kind of get confused. You look at the uptime of VMs as an example, just simple construct might be 3 9s and a 5 if you've got 2 or more. Um, that's not necessarily the case, because now if you've got an application running on that envelope and it's making use of data services and other PaaS services, there's a composite SLA that you have to kind of take into account on all of the downstream components. That's something you have to be consciously aware of as you're adopting new PaaS services or SaaS services that you incorporate into the mix. And then it goes without saying that if there's a data storage element to that you have to devise and have at least a pathway to be able to fail that over to another region. Um, knock on lots of wood, there hasn't been a catastrophic like region level cloud failure with any of the cloud providers. But one of the concerning things that's always in the back of my mind is that to me, it's probably going to be a race. So like, east goes down, you're going to have a bunch of customers there that are probably going to be going to west or whatever other region that they select. And I don't know if the capacity exists to be able to.
In another region. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's like I know about some infrastructure challenges that pretty much each cloud provider has, and how heavily some of these regions, like there was a meme I saw today in AWS West where they showed US East 1, they show New York City people walking, there's no space to walk. And then they show US West 2, which is West Coast, and there are a bunch of people sitting and having a corona, so like,
Yeah,
basically they're talking about how capacity is kind of moving. But I think you brought up a great point, like whenever a disaster happens, right? And we have been in this space for a while to understand disaster and the failover. Some people do blue green deployment. Okay, region's not available, we'll fail over there, and then you can't do anything about the speed of flight sometimes, but you just still have to consider and plan for disaster. So do you have like disaster recovery mechanisms and strategies set up? Do you have DR days, or are you like, hey, we want to get away from this completely and we want like a system that's always on?
yeah. I mean, that's certainly the goal is harder to achieve because you think about the cost of running duplicative services. Particularly if you've got data partition or compute resources partitioned per customer. But certainly we have to think about how we replicate data to other regions. And we definitely we have disaster recovery drills to make sure that we can actually execute on that and be able to restore service to a customer. And we leave it up to our customers to make that choice and decision, kind of when and if they want to be able to do that. If there were some sort of catastrophic failure, because of that race problem I talked about. And then in some cases, you got a 2-hour outage, it might be fixed in 2 hours and 1 minute, and then it might take many multiple hours to do a failover. So like when do you pull the trigger, and
100%.
yeah.
And so, and the perspective is like, if say you also have like a region goes down, right? And you have a backup sitting. You have to be able to load that backup or move the data out, and you only have limited bandwidth, right? Like that's the other thing to consider, because you have all this data getting replicated, migrating, and all of that. So it's very interesting to like plan for all that, and that's why I liked what you said. Like the cumulative SLA is also critical for the overall system. You can't just say, well, my apps are going to be back in 99.999% of the time, but what if the database takes like 95%, and 5%
Yeah,
is lost,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So is your system like heavily like data focused, or is it more app focused? Because
it's
do
a
you
little bit
store
of
a lot of
both.
data? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to load a lot of data in memory, which implies you have to hit some storage facility, or relational stores and so forth, to be able to actually rehydrate the necessary information to perform calculations. And then when that work is done, you have to persist back some subset of that data as well. So that's where some of the PaaS services really come to shine in all of the cloud providers, because they regardless whether or not it's simple storage, whether it's S3 storage in AWS or Azure storage. They have capabilities to replicate data to another region, or if you're using some more advanced service like SQL or a relational store, there's capabilities to do that, and even a lot of the NoSQL stores have the ability to do that.
So what do you like? I'm out of curiosity. Like in memory, what do you use an in-memory database for most of this, or are you using like a relational database that does like fast caching for you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we have a lot of data that's stored relationally, and then we have to materialize that in memory. So that's actually honestly was where the innovations of our platform kind of comes to shine. That our founder and co-founder had a lot of background in the finance space and kind of set out to solve for some of the challenges and kind of reconciling this data. And it's done in memory using some algorithms that were devised.
Very
And
cool.
kind of,
That's like part of your secret sauce, I
yeah,
believe.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's
That's
all done in memory.
yeah, that's awesome. And on the relational side, are you like using any like familiar databases? Like, are you like Azure specifics? Are you like SQL Server based, like
Yeah. Yeah. So
vertical
we
systems? Yeah.
Yeah, so we use SQL Server pretty heavily to, and then therein on the SLA front, the replication capabilities of SQL to be able to achieve high levels of availability.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the reality is like with all these databases, right? Like if you go back, they were built so well, and they do the job so great. Like even today, everybody is teaching SQL in colleges, right? Like that traditional databases, that paradigm has obviously evolved. The requirements of the database has changed, but they still do the job, obviously. And depending on your architectural requirement, you can like go around, So that's great. I mean, it's this is such a fascinating conversation. I'm like more and more I talk to you, I mean, I know I want to go and dig and understand more of what what you do actually. But again, we have to keep the secret sauce to where the secret sauce is, right? So tell me this, like how do you decide then, for like how do you decide to take new tech, and how do you decide to like adopt that, and how does your team kind of continue to innovate and figure out, okay, we want to learn this thing and maybe this pattern makes sense, we should like use Kafka, or maybe explore CockroachDB or Redis and things like that. How what's the method within OneStream?
Yeah, so we have some architectural research teams that are exploring some of those more, uh, I think cloud native I think is an overused word, but some of those capabilities that are kind of core to some of the cloud providers, so, such as in-memory caching, and with Redis and that sort of thing. And it's interesting. You look at solutions like that, and it becomes a physics problem when you have like the volume of data that I'm describing in memory. You can't just move that volume of data across the network easily, or in and out of Redis store. So there's some interesting challenges that kind of come around with volumes of data with some of those solutions. But to answer your question more succinctly, we have some research teams actively doing some research on innovations and different things that we could capitalize on in our platform, such as like the Azure Relay thing that I mentioned earlier, to be able to streamline some of our network connectivity. That was an innovation that kind of came out of our team, but also looking at what we can do on taking subsets of our observability data as an example and being able to surface that to a customer. You think about things like CPU and memory that might be important to us operationally running infrastructure to be able to support a customer, but to a finance user it doesn't make a lot of sense if your CPU is high. What does that mean? What is it? What can I do? What can't I do? What made that happen? We have some observability data that we're capturing for our support purposes, but being able to explore ways to be able to extend that to a customer and provide them meaningful intelligence about what is going on inside the ecosystem. They don't they can't see all the blinky lights on, but making it meaningful to them, and that they ran David ran this report and it killed the server because it ran 3 million queries or something. To be able to provide that level of insight. So those are some like examples that we're looking at doing in the control plane.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. I think that's very helpful for users, right? I think observability is also having a moment in the last few years where customers are like, well, I want to really know what am I doing on the system that is affecting, say, performance and compute and things like that. Back in the day, everybody was like, well, I'll just throw it at the SaaS provider and I'm like expect them. But it's always good for you to justify, hey, look, this is what you're doing. We're going to send you the metric. Do what you need to optimize this, or maybe there's another pattern that you can to break this, so that's very helpful. Awesome.
Yeah, and then the other interesting thing that or interesting from my point of view, because if you think about it, it's like a simple construct is identity. And as a SaaS provider, you have to have tentacles that can extend into whether it be OpenID providers, SAML providers, and maybe multiples. Like a customer of ours grows through acquisition, and they've got some entity that they've acquired that's got a different provider than and something that's like simple conceptually that you engage with and interact with daily, typing in your username and password is actually pretty freaking complicated when it comes to all of the different variations and permutations of that. And
Exactly.
so
And then you
that's
have to be able to serve all of this across the infrastructure, right? So that's a challenge. So are you doing something about it? Like I'm curious to know that. Yeah.
yeah. So that we have something called we actually refer to as a OneStream identity server, and it basically is it's an OpenID that's how we interface with it. But then it can actually in turn interface with any and all
Whichever system
multiple.
it is on.
Yeah,
Yeah, very
exactly.
cool. Well, that's awesome. That's great to know. I'm really glad that I could kind of go in and a little bit understand what you guys are doing. Seems like it's a really critical system with like some really great intelligence built into it. One of the things I wanted to like get your perspective now is as we like what you think enterprises need to do to adopt the cloud correctly. Well, everybody feels like they should be on the cloud, but then sometimes it's taking them years to move to the cloud, or they make these mistakes. So, what's your advice to companies who are trying to adopt and move?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And one thing that I've seen time and time again, I kind of go back even to the earlier example I mentioned when I first saw Azure, is the mantra of lift and shift or just wholesale migrations. Um, in my experience in doing or that sort of approach is, without any sort of level of pragmatic thought around it, can be really costly. I guess just kind of net it out in doing a vis-a-vis comparison between running that same service in the cloud, it might actually be significantly more costly in some cases, depending on what the nature is of the application or workload, and what things it's using. But than it is in an on-premises environment, or the perception could be that is it, because there's always there's other overhead, cooling costs and other ancillary things that might come into play. But just looking at it at a workload level, it's I think the rate of success I've seen is a little bit lower if you just do a direct migration. I think that you have to kind of take into account some level of modernization. Like, you don't have to do a wholesale rewrite or modernize the workload entirely and go to full cloud native, Kubernetes and all the other cool things we talked about. But I do think some level of modernization is needed. And I use like a simple example on the VM scale sets, like a simple concept. Yes, it's very infrastructure focused, but that's a way to be able to scale up and scale down infrastructure and just kind of throw away those environments when they're done. Make it easy to. So that's like an example of a simple modernization that could be employed to be able to try to minimize the costs.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that pattern too, right? Where folks are like, well, we'll move to the cloud, we'll move everything. And in doing so, you don't really know what the head is or the tail is, right? And also there are so many things as you move to the cloud. There are so many other ideas, certain patterns that you're used to that you have to get familiar with, because especially if an enterprise doesn't have the existing cloud expertise, it's also something that you have to learn. And so while you're trying to migrate, you're also learning how all of this works. So that adds to an overhead as well.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely 100%. And then, I think that the other thing that I think is important to consider, we talked a little bit about observability, but even infrastructure monitoring is a lot of enterprises have that in place in their on-premises environment. You need to either be able to extend that into the cloud and be able to have the proper monitoring and alerting of that infrastructure, to make it cloud compatible. In other words, that's and I think one of the other things that is I mentioned just the sheer lift and shift, but then you think about all of the perimeter elements that goes along with that, and what I'm referring to now is like the network security, like the things like firewalls or network inspection or traffic inspection devices, and you can very easily over index into those those services or appliances you might whereby there could be cloud services that you could use very easily to be able to simplify um, the management of some of those data plane protection devices that the customers might employ into their infrastructure or ecosystem. And I think that it is important to be able to maybe evaluate what the cloud provider can bring to you to be able to take advantage of, versus spinning up a lot of ancillary network devices
And
that
trying to do it yourself. Yeah, I
could be
agree.
very.
Yeah. So what do you think is like, okay, if I have to ask you, what is the one area that's most critical for someone to learn uh, as they adopt and move to the cloud? What do you think that would be? Like, what's your advice to somebody who's like, well, I like what Ryan is saying, but I don't know anything. So let me learn that one thing.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, Microsoft has this concept that they call the cloud adoption framework, and I think all the cloud providers have something very similar to that. And think of it as like a recipe guide for different for common vetted practices. So instead of trying to roll your own, or say, using the appliance example I just talked about, say, well, I had all this stuff on-prem, I'm just going to move it all up uh, and run it. And it includes things like, what is your more simplified things like how you IP numbering scheme, how you set up virtual networks and VPCs and so forth in the cloud, that type of detail, as well as how to deploy workload XYZ. And I think that's a really good useful tool to be able to follow, and regardless of what cloud provider you're going into, to be able to have some insight about how others have done it. And
Right. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So this is where you heard, everybody. Go check out the Azure, architecture framework, which is very helpful for Ryan. Ryan, I'm going to ask you an opinionated question. What's your favorite cloud service? Like, sorry, Azure cloud service.
Azure Cloud Server, oh boy, that's
I know. I mean, pick from
yeah,
what, 20, 50? Yeah.
yeah, that's a really hard question. So, I'm gonna throw a curveball and answer with some of the IoT Hub. Actually, I did I was at Microsoft. I did a lot of work in the IoT space, and that the Internet of Things is equally as talked about as cloud native and AI stuff, is today. But it's a challenge to be able to manage those devices at scale. And IoT Hub has a lot of facilities to be able to manage not just the devices themselves, but intelligence, like the actual code artifacts running on the device, or maybe containers running at the edge doing analytical processing before the data gets offloaded in the cloud. IoT Hub actually has a lot of capabilities to be able to help with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been working on an integration with IoT Hub right now. Like we already integrated with it, but I'm doing some personal explorations with it, which I feel is fascinating. I don't think IoT Hub gets the moment in the sun that it deserves, but thanks for
Yeah,
bringing that up.
kind of like one of those infrastructure things. When you start like indexing down into what it can do, is really freaking powerful. Like that, there's construction equipment companies that I know had used it for having intelligent devices like running in the cabs of their construction equipment that could actually run ML models to be able to tell the operator, don't do this particular activity because it's has a high propensity to be able to break some hydraulic cylinder is expensive to repair. You can actually do that sort of like detection in the cab, and then and your next reaction or next question would probably be how do you alter that once it's deployed, and that's where IoT Hub really shines is how you can target individual devices or the scope of a number of devices of a particular type of equipment. It was a really cool and powerful capability. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's awesome. It's great to hear that, Ryan. I mean, it's fantastic. I didn't even realize how the time went, but we could get into so many things in tech, and you and I can like keep talking about and we were just talking about Azure today, mostly. What happens when you talk about GCP and AWS? But it's been great to have you. Tell the listeners where can they follow you or OneStream and some of the stuff that you guys are working on.
Yeah, so OneStream.com is our website. I'm on LinkedIn. I occasionally post things there on different happenings that I'm involved with or engaged with. Don't do a lot of stuff on Twitter or some of the other socials, but LinkedIn for me personally, and then also certainly for OneStream, there's a lot of happenings there as well.
Very cool. Well, it's awesome. So go check out Ryan Berry on LinkedIn as well as the OneStream product on LinkedIn. It's great to understand today what you guys are working on, and all the best to you and your team. It's been fascinating. And again, thank you so much for coming on, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.